Hey everyone, welcome back. Dave in History for the Ages here. Remember, like, subscribe, leave that notification bell on so you don't miss any of my new videos. And this topic is very important. Why do civilizations, why do empires fall? And there's a pattern that I've seen teaching history for so long of five things. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Which of these five do you think is the most important? Are there any other thoughts as well, other causes? And does the United States fall into any of these, right? And to what degree? So let's kind of go through them here. I think should be fun discussion. So one that's very common is they simply get too big to rule and to govern. So many examples. Here you see a map of the Roman Empire. In the next slide, I'm going to show you a map of the Ottoman Empire. If you look at, watch my lecture on the ancient Persians or Alexander, I mean, massive. The Mongols, oh my God, they were so big. And the Mongols, made the Roman Empire look tiny, right? And the whole thing is, it's not just in the sense of big borders you have to defend. I'm going to get into that in a moment with another slide and another topic about invasions being a cause, but just to administrate. How do you make sure taxes are collected? How do you make sure roads are built? How do you communicate from one side of the empire to the other? So you can see how big the Roman Empire is, stretching from, the Atlantic Ocean all the way around the Mediterranean, massive. You look at the Ottoman Empire, look at the amount of real estate again that they have to govern over at its height. And it's not a surprise in many of these cases when you see empires fall, they simply get too big. Now, does the United States have to worry about that? I think this was more of a problem for ancient civilizations, but even, the Ottoman Empire fell in modern times. But I think today we have, mass communication that we could do. It's much easier to kind of govern and administrate over large areas. I mean, other civilization tried to do kind of local things. We have the states to help govern. The Ottomans had the millet system. And so there were the Persians even had kind of some localized systems to govern as well. But it's really hard to govern a massive piece of real estate and keep everyone on the same page. So do I think this is an issue in the United States? This is one that I wouldn't worry about, that we've gotten too big, for example. And we're also kind of the foundations of being the state system has always created, this idea of localized rules and not one big oversight federal government overseeing everything. So this is maybe one I wouldn't worry about too much with the United States in terms of too big to govern, right? Now, economic strain, I think this is a factor as well. And so when you look at the Roman Empire and its fall, inflation was a huge problem starting in the crisis of the third century when the Roman Empire fell. And I have a whole video on the quote unquote fall of the Roman Empire. France, if you look at, what happened to France a long time before the French Revolution, the spending on Versailles is another good example. Probably one of the classic examples is the British Empire, right? I mean, those old expression, the sun never sets on the British Empire. It was so big and so massive, but fighting World War I and World War II cost them so much money. It was simply too difficult to maintain. The cost of maintenance of that empire was too high. I believe I read somewhere that on the average, as a result of this, 1 out of every 4 or 5 days, some nation claims its independence, has an Independence Day from Britain, and shows you the sense of how big their empire was. So, in terms of the US, is economic strain a concern in the United States? I mean, today, as I'm recording this, the United States economy is really strong, probably one of arguably the strongest economies in the world. We produce a lot. We obviously have a lot of great technologies, but, I think there is one big issue economically that could bring the end of the United States, and that is our debt. I have a whole video on our national debt. When I recorded, it was 36 trillion. Now it's 37 trillion. And I encourage people to go and watch that video if you want to kind of understand the issue of the national debt, because I think that could create a long-term economic problem to the US. So one, they get too big. Two, economic strain. Three, this we see a lot of civilizations with this internal conflict, corruption. Again, if you use Rome as an example, there's primary sources we have of bribery was rampant, lavish spending, corrupt rulers. We see the same thing during the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the Soviet Union before it's left. We know these communist elites, they lived and enjoyed privilege while the average person, didn't have the basic necessities and stuff. So what about the United States? Do we have corruption in the United States? And you can all stop laughing right now. I mean, folks, of course we do, right? I mean, and look, I am the last person who buys into like conspiracy theories and things like the moon landing didn't happen, or Pearl Harbor was a setup, or 9/11. I do not buy into conspiracy theories very quickly. I need evidence. I'm a historian. But even I, someone who does not buy into conspiracy theories, clearly sees there is tremendous corruption in our politics. I mean, you see very rarely somebody entering politics and being able to come out of it like squeaky clean. And that's just the sad reality of power in politics. I don't think that's exclusive to the United States. But if it becomes problematic, people can get really alienated, right? If you get to the point where people feel the politicians only care about themselves and they don't care about the people, these can lead to internal conflicts. Absolutely. So I think, and we see this from different political perspective. I mean, part of the appeal of President Trump was people felt there was a lot of political corruption. And ironically, a lot of people who don't like President Trump feel there is a lot of political corruption. So I kind of see this from different angles as well. But definitely that brings down civilizations. All right, this is a natural one. Just enemies, external enemies, and invasions. I mean, again, if you look at the fall of the of the Roman world, what finally brought it into the fall of the Rome in the West were these Germanic tribes. And it wasn't just the Germanic tribes came in and just leveled Rome one day. As I explained in my lectures, my longer lectures, this was a gradual period of time over about 100 years where the Germanic tribes, a little bit more than that, slowly enter Rome, and western part of Rome stops being Rome. It starts being Franks and Lombards and Visigoths and all of that. So it's not just invasion in the sense of a military invasion that will bring you down, but an invasion that changes the culture and nature of a civilization. The Byzantine Empire, when it became strong, it got hit by the Crusaders, by the Seljuks, by the Ottomans. Of course, the Persian Empire gets hit by Alexander the Great, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire did have some issue of invasion, but for them, it was more the strong rise of nationalism, and a lot of people within the Ottoman Empire just didn't want to be part of the Ottoman Empire anymore. I'm Greek. I don't want to be part of the Ottoman Empire. I'm not, I'm Egyptian. I don't want to be part of the Ottoman Empire anymore. And we see that happening to them more than necessarily invasion. Now, what about the United States? Did the United States have to worry about some external invasion? Now, from a military standpoint, I don't think so, right? In terms of, we have these two oceans, we have a massive military, we have nuclear bombs, right? So that, no. But I think there is an issue of, and this is talked a lot about, and, full disclosure, I'm an immigrant, is that, when you have immigration that comes in, and if there's zero assimilation that takes place with immigration, that could be a problem. You kind of see this a little bit with what happened in ancient Rome. So immigration, I think, is great, but at the same time, you have to have a nation that controls its borders. So I don't see like a massive military invasion being a cause of the fall of the United States, but I do see a potential problem if we don't have strong assimilation for people coming in to the United States as immigrants, still maintaining, what they bring in from the outside. I think that's great, but at the same time, understanding, hey, these are the core values of what it is to be American. And then finally, the last factor that I think brings about civilization's fall is failure to adapt, right? What's the old saying? Never bring a knife to a gunfight. I always love this little scene in Indiana Jones. If you remember that first movie, it's great, where the guy's wielding a sword and, he's doing all these fancy things, and then Indy just takes the gun and boom, right? And I think the best classic example of failure to adapt is the Manchu or Qing dynasty. I cover this in my lectures on colonization when Europe started to colonize China. How are they able to do it so easily? China's massive. They didn't adapt. They didn't industrialize. They didn't modernize. They looked at the West as backwards. They were still picking their military leaders on who could wield the best swords. And, you've got modern technology and tanks coming in. The Ottoman Empire failed to adapt. They tried something called the Tanzimat. It was a bit too little, too late. The Russian Empire with the czars, they failed to adapt and modernize. So this is something you definitely see bringing about an end to civilizations. They don't adapt well. Now, what about the U.S. on this one? This is actually, I think, one the U.S. does really well. I think the United States adapts incredibly well, modernizes, keeps up with technology. A lot of people don't even know this, but the chip technology that the United States has well advanced of other nations, even China. And so we're always kind of looking at that technology, modernizing in that sense. So I think that's something the United States does well. So I would say those are the 5 big things that lead to the fall of various civilizations and empires. I was just kind of touching this. There's so much more to this topic, but I hope you found that interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments again. What do you think in terms of the United States or any other civilization? Europe today, do they face some of these issues in terms of what might lead to their fall? All right, everyone. I hope you found that interesting. Please like, share, leave comments, and check out some of my other videos here. Everyone have a great day. Thank you.